In the early frost-laced dawns of 1701, long after the last cries of the witch trials had died into brittle whispers, Salem Hollow held its breath, not out of guilt nor shame, but fear, that old, ancestral kind, the kind buried deeper than graves, deeper than the memory of fire and rope and lawless verdicts. The village, if it could still be called one, lay nestled between the low hills and hunched trees of Massachusetts, where the land sloped inward like a cradle. But no mother sang lullabies here. Salem Hollow had once been part of a thriving trade path, but now even the wind seemed to avoid it. Homes, gray, shuttered, crooked, stood like empty watchtowers, their hearths silent, their porches rotting as if the very nails had loosened to escape what lingered within the timbers. On a frigid morning in late March, under a sky that looked less like cloud cover and more like something suffocating the sun, 13 children were found dead. Not slumped or fallen or curled, but upright, their bodies locked in a death posture no physician could name. They stood at the edge of the eastern grove, eyes open, hands at their sides, backs perfectly straight as if held by invisible threads from below. No blood, no bruising, no visible cause, just pale, breathless stillness. Parents found them not in their homes, but scattered like sentries in a circle that mirrored no known constellation, only the raw black ring of burned earth that locals hadn't dared enter for over a generation. That land was the place where in 1678 a fire had gutted the orchard and left the trees charred and twisted. They said it was lightning. Others said it was where the coven had tried their final ritual before the Puritans caught them. But there was never proof, only the silence and the way animals stopped breeding near its perimeter. After the fire, nothing grew there again, and nothing tried. The soil turned, coppery, the air metallic, and crows flew wide arcs to avoid its shadow. Even the roots of nearby trees bent away. But in 1701, the children, 13, all students of Sister Eleanor's schoolhouse, were found encircling it like they had been drawn from their beds by something not human, not godly, and not concerned with earthly rules. Reverend Obadiah Cray, a stiff-backed, soft-spoken man brought in after the last executioner laid down his blade in Salem proper, had already seen signs. His dreams in February had grown crowded, children's voices humming through the psalms backward, the chapel's bell ringing when his hands hadn't touched it. And once, just once, the face of his dead sister staring back at him from his basin water, her mouth frozen in the shape of a name he'd long tried to forget. Maisel. When the children were found, he did not ask for explanations. He simply walked into the chapel, fell to his knees, and wept in a way that cracked something loose in the rafters. The burials were carried out before the morning thaw. No funerals, no procession. Just a cart led by 2 mute men from Danvers, eyes wide and faces veiled in damp cloth, hauling the children's bodies to the grove. They were buried standing, the shafts dug with alarming speed as if the earth itself cooperated, swallowing the young without protest. The parents weren't told where. They weren't even invited. Reverend Cray gave no sermon. The chapel doors remained shut. Inside, the organ's pipes had been removed after one began playing on its own the winter prior. Some whispered the sound resembled an old chant, not Latin, but something older. something spoken in the forests of Europe long before the Mayflower dreamed of crossing the sea. Those who had lived through the trials clenched their jaws and said nothing. The names of the 13 children were recorded only once, on a vellum scroll that Sister St. Eleanor locked inside a cabinet behind the pulpit. She, too, had changed since the incident. Her hair went white overnight. She refused to speak unless spoken to, and even then only answered with scripture. Her hands trembled whenever a child approached, even if by accident, and she stopped teaching entirely. The schoolhouse, once filled with chalk dust and hymnals, now held silence so thick it stung the ears. Villagers reported hearing scratching beneath the floorboards, soft at first, like mice, then deliberate, like knuckles. A local boy who peeked under the schoolhouse claimed he saw a row of pale fingers gripping the beams from below, but no one listened. His mother slapped the story out of him. Fear was not welcome in public. Not after 1692. The new rule of Salem Hollow was simple. We do not accuse, we do not question, and we do not look east after dark. But the land did not forget. Within days of the burials, the grove changed. Where the 13 bodies were placed, 13 saplings began to grow, not with leaves or bark, but with spindly stalks of silvery fibers that glowed faintly in the moonlight. They bent toward the chapel every night, even though the wind blew the other way. Animals avoided the grove entirely. A hunter's dog wandered near and returned deaf. A girl, Annabel Moon, whose brother had been among the 13, attempted to find his resting place. She returned at dawn with mud-caked feet and a mouth full of ash, unable to speak. She clawed at her chest for days until her father locked her in the attic. She later hanged herself with her rosary. One by one, the bereaved parents stopped attending church. They claimed the pews were always wet when they sat, like something had cried there before them. Some heard their children's names called from the choir loft during sermons. Others found their windows fogged with handprints in the morning, though it hadn't rained. One man, Elias Thatcher, the town's carpenter, dreamt that his son was still alive, beneath the earth, eyes open, singing a song with no words. He tore up his floorboards looking for a path to the grove and was later found sitting in a hollow he had dug with his hands, whispering, "He is taller now." Sister Eleanor eventually confessed, though not to Reverend Cray. She spoke instead to a drifter, a one-eyed scholar named Levi Rask, who had arrived weeks before under the pretense of documenting regional folklore. She handed him an old rotted book wrapped in wax cloth, claiming it had been found in a crate washed ashore from a wrecked ship in 1699. The book was written in ink that shimmered and dried into scabs. No known language marked its pages, but one symbol repeated again and again. A circle with 13 notches, all pointed inward. She claimed the children had begun dreaming of this symbol in December. They drew it in their slates, carved it into pews, etched it into the frost on their windows. One child, Thomas Grigg, had asked her what it meant. When she said she didn't know, he whispered, "It means the sky is tired of looking down." Levi disappeared the next day. His room above the tavern was found empty, save for the book, now opened to a new page it hadn't had before, a sketch of the grove with roots shaped like fingers clutching upward. No one spoke his name after that. Reverend Cray tried to cleanse the village. He fasted. He prayed. He burned all unsanctioned texts and demanded the children's names never be spoken again. But when he looked into the chapel's basin, he saw 13 reflections, none of them his. He smashed it with a stone. It didn't crack. In a final act of desperation, he nailed a sign to the chapel door. The earth has claimed its due. And then he too vanished, leaving behind only a trail of barefoot prints leading toward the grove. His boots were found in the eastern mud, but never his body. In his stead, silence returned. Not the silence of peace, but of waiting. The kind that settles in before something ancient lifts its head. Those who remained in Salem Hollow did so under rules unspoken but well understood. Don't speak their names, don't break the circle, and if you hear a hymn in the dark, close your eyes, and whatever you do, don't hum along. It began with the sound of breathless voices, not full songs, not cries or whispers, but strange half-hymns, as if sung from throats too hollow to finish, slipping up through floorboards and rising into the dreams of the grieving, like incense through cracked windows. In the weeks following the silent, shameful burial of the 13 children, each entombed upright in the dead soil of the eastern grove, those who still lived in Salem Hollow began to awaken not with rest, but with melodies caught in their throats, dry and unfinished, yet eerily synchronized, as if they had all been part of a choir rehearsing in sleep. The parents who had lost children were the first to be affected, and soon their behavior changed subtly, then sharply, mouths moving without sound during meals, heads tilting eastward in church even when the altar remained unchanged, fingers twitching rhythmically when idle. In their homes, 13 marks appeared again and again, not just gouged into walls, but scraped into hearthstone, arranged on tabletops with pins, burned into banisters with candle soot, always in a crescent or inward spiral. Elias Thatcher, the blacksmith who had buried his twin daughters, became the first to etch those 13 scars into his own chest with the tip of a fire-hardened awl, saying nothing as he bled in silence by his forge, staring at the eastern window like it had opened to something far beyond the fields. Others followed in stranger ways, one mother weaving dolls of her lost son's hair and burying them beneath floor tiles, another inscribing psalm numbers into every mirror until her own reflection no longer matched her face. The chapel organ, long gutted and sealed, was heard again at twilight, not just once, but repeatedly, always before storms, always the same untraceable melody, like fingers coaxing broken pipes into life with brie. Not human nor mechanical. Sister Eleanor, the former schoolmistress, locked herself in the bell tower of the chapel and refused food, drink, or speech for 3 days, and when she finally descended, her eyes were sunken, and her skin loose like candle wax left too near a flame. She spoke to no one at first, only walked to the center of town with the waterlogged codex she had once hidden, pages flaking like dried leaves, and she placed it atop a stone marker near the chapel steps, as though offering it not to the townsfolk, but to the air, or to something listening. It was Levi Rask, the wanderer scholar who had returned, drawn back like a moth to the lantern of unnatural theology, who dared open the tome. The ink shifted like oil, and the pages resisted being turned, but what he deciphered from the margins chilled him more than anything he had found in the dusty corners of European cathedrals or beneath the floorboards of Eastern Orthodox crypts. The codex was not merely misinterpreted Hebrew, but an amalgam, a stitched language born from dead tongues, borrowing syntax from pre-Sumerian spellcraft and pale Gothic phrasings lost in the margins of banished monastic orders. It described not a burial rite, but a tethering, a ritual designed to anchor impurity in youthful vessels to soil of red memory. The soil, it claimed, needed to be previously scorched, previously fed. Salem Hollow's Eastern Grove, burned in 1678 under circumstances never fully disclosed, matched the description perfectly. The ritual required 13 children, but here Sister Eleanor had made a fatal error. The rite did not call for 13 chosen. It called for 12 vessels and 1 key, one to anchor the others, one to remain self-aware beneath, one who would not be dead in the way mortals understand death, but rather aware and waiting. And it was this child, the 13th, who had smiled upon death, who had drawn the others in dreams, who had whispered to Eleanor through the cracks of reality long before the ritual ever began. His name was never spoken afterward, but his initials, A.V., began to appear carved into elm trees and school desks, even after the wood had been planed smooth. The boy's smile was the last memory several of the other children's parents could recall clearly, and always with dread, because there had been something triumphant in it, not joyful, but final, as if he had reached the end of a story no one else knew they were part of. He had not been chosen, he had chosen them, and it was this fact that haunted Sister Eleanor's testimony, given not from the pulpit but from the chalked wall of the schoolhouse itself, scrawled in a frenzy before she vanished. He was not of us, he was already waiting, we gave him a body to wake inside. After this, the schoolhouse was sealed entirely. Children claimed that from within its boarded windows, tapping could be heard late into the night, tapping in sets of 13, then silence, then a soft hum rising through the cold wood, as though the hymn was spreading, blooming through the structure like mold. When Reverend Cray disappeared, his final note mentioning the Latin subiterra filii, non in pace requiescant, it was believed he had attempted to reverse the rite. But in the weeks that followed, even more unsettling signs emerged. A farmer tilling the edge of the grove struck something beneath the soil, and when unearthed, it revealed not bones, but something resembling bark, flesh like wood grown in the shape of small human limbs. Sap leaked from it, deep red, sticky, and smelling faintly of decay and honey. The farmer abandoned his land and was later found drowned in his well, mouth filled with dirt. Meanwhile, those affected by the hymn, the ones who hummed unknowingly, the ones who marked crescents into their own arms, the ones who painted their windows black, began congregating at night near the grove, walking there in trance or grief or something more ritualistic. Witnesses described seeing 13 figures circling the center tree line, all wearing makeshift hoods, each stopping at intervals to kneel, press their heads to the earth, and hum. No one dared interrupt. No one knew who started it. The melodies matched the ones heard through the floorboards of the schoolhouse and from the haunted organ, always in the same unplaceable key, always slightly different but unmistakably connected. Those who lived further from town began posting charms, small burlap sacks filled with salt, nails, and horse teeth, above their door frames, an old habit revived from Europe's anti-possession traditions. A preacher from Boston arrived one morning, claiming to have heard tales of blasphemy and madness. He lasted 3 nights. On the 4th, he was seen walking backward into the grove before dawn, humming the 13th hymn with tears running upward from his cheeks. His eyes rolled so far back they showed only white. He was never seen again, but for days afterward, his boots remained at the grove's edge, steam rising from them, as though the man still stood there. Townsfolk began to notice clocks failing, milk spoiling faster, shadows falling in the wrong direction. On several occasions, people spoke of seeing children, 13 of them, standing at a distance in the fields, watching, unmoving, only to vanish when approached. Some claimed their mouths moved in unison. One woman fainted when she realized they were mouthing her daughter's lullaby. In desperation, the last elders of the village gathered beneath the belfry and attempted to burn the codex, but the pages refused to catch flame. Instead, the text faded from the page, then returned moments later in new configurations, new stanzas that no one recalled being there before. It was as if the book rewrote itself, as if it was a participant rather than a record. That night, the organ played again, louder than before. Its tones no longer resemble it, not music, but the heavy, exhaling breath of a massive, unseen throat. The hymn itself took on new structure, a descending, minor pattern that collapsed into dissonance before beginning again. And each time it repeated, the villagers who heard it claimed to forget things, their own names, the names of their dead, the names of God. Only Sister Eleanor remained immune, and she alone seemed to grow more lucid, though her speech now was broken into verse, and her eyes remained fixed to the northeast, lips counting silently. It was Levi Rask who would finally uncover the final truth buried within the codex's ciphered margins. Notes written in invisible ink, only legible by lamplight, made with ash from burned bone. The ritual had failed not because of error, but because it had succeeded in anchoring the 13th, the boy who was not a boy, the thing that had worn a child's face, the echo that had always lingered beneath Salem Hollow since before the fire, before the settlers, even before the first stone altar had been swallowed by the woods. That entity now lived beneath, fed by hymns, awakened by memory, sustained by attention. The 13 were not dead in the way we understand death. They were suspended, conscious, aware, and linked to the breath of the town itself. To forget them was to release them. To remember them was to feed them. And the hymn was their tether, sung in bone, echoing through soil, passed from mouth to mouth until even those who had never met them began to dream of standing upright in the frost, eyes open, arms still. The final line Levi translated before burning the codex himself was scrawled into his own arm with a nail dipped in red ink. The child who smiles shall never sleep, and those who stand will never kneel again. Levi was last seen walking toward the grove at dusk, humming, barefoot, smiling the same way the 13th child had. And when morning came, the grove had grown one more tree, and beneath it a single lewd dark root, twisted upward like a finger pressed to silence. By the time the autumn leaves began to rot into the mud of Salem Hollow, there was no one left to rake them, no boots to crush them underfoot, no windows to peer out between lace curtains at the skeletal trees now bending, not with the wind, but with something deeper, something that stirred beneath the ground like a second, older breath. The fields had long gone fallow, their crops curling black before harvest, their roots shriveling from something in the soil that didn't want to be disturbed. Horses wandered without bridles, their coats slick with sweat, even in the chill. Eyes glazed as though they'd looked into a fire no man could see. Doors swung open in the breeze but were never shut, and chimneys remained dead. No smoke, no warmth, no families to gather round hearths that now held only ash too wet to burn. By then, the name Salem Hollow was spoken only in whispers, and only in places where candles burned day and night, where holy water was kept not for ritual but survival, and where hymnals were locked shut with iron clasps. Those who remembered the village spoke not of its people, but of the Eastern Grove, a place now so feared that the mere mention of its trees brought silence to entire rooms. That grove, where once the 13 children had been buried standing like pale sentinels of some forgotten sin, was now a place of constant disturbance. The soil never settled. It bubbled at times, not with heat, but like something breathed just beneath the crust. At night, travelers unlucky enough to pass near its perimeter claimed to see hands, small, colorless hands, reaching up from the earth, flexing not as if in pain, but as if searching, yearning for something above. One drifter, a thin, sun-scorched man from Albany, who wandered into a tavern outside Boston ranting of the grove that hums, claimed he had seen 13 children walking backward through the woods, their eyes sewn shut with black thread, their mouths moving in perfect unison. He said they didn't speak. They hummed. And that tune, they say he carved it into his own chest with a broken bottle, humming as he bled, laughing when he should have been screaming. The melody matched the lost Psalter page Reverend Cray had once left behind before disappearing. A hymn in a key no church had ever taught. A descent into minor dissonance that looped endlessly, refusing closure like a door that creaks but never opens. The grave markers, once roughly carved, had vanished, replaced by trees, 13 of them. No one remembered planting them, but they stood in a perfect circle now, equidistant, all facing inward. Their bark was dry and ridged like old bone, and their branches never bore leaves. If cut, they bled, not sap, but something red and thin, more like diluted blood than resin, and it smelled of rust, rosewater, and something far more intimate, like the breath of someone you once feared you'd forgotten. No birds nested in them. No insects crawled up their trunks. They were not of the forest. They were of below. Word spread across Massachusetts and even beyond, though only in rumors passed between porters and gravediggers, among midwives and undertakers, those who stood closest to life's edge. Salem Hollow was cursed, they said, but not by witches or devils. It had become anchored, a place where something had been rooted so deeply that no priest, no scripture, no fire could extract it. In Boston, a mapmaker removed the village from his atlas entirely in 1705. When asked why, he merely shook his head and muttered, "If the land forgets you, so should we." Another preacher, this time from Concord, a man young and eager and full of the zeal that comes before wisdom, tried to bless the land. He walked into the grove at midday, reciting psalms as he cast salt in a circle. By sunset, he was found half buried, face down in a shallow depression where the 13th tree now stood. He lived, but only in body. His mind was gone, repa, laced by a single muttered phrase, over and over until his death 3 days later. They are not dead. They are anchored. Townsfolk who passed near the old trails began hearing names on the wind. 13 in total, none of which appeared in local birth records. They'd appear in dreams first, then on the lips of children too young to understand fear, whispered while playing, etched into the frost on window panes in the morning. It was as if the names had never needed voices to return. One woman, a widow from Ipswich, claimed she saw her son, dead 5 years, standing just outside the grove, hands at his sides, eyes wide open, mouth twitching like he was trying to remember something he'd never learned. She said he pointed to the 13th tree and mouthed a name. She will not repeat what it was. She was later found dead in her bed, face pale, lips sealed shut with twine. Her diary contained 13 lines scratched in charcoal. Don't let them stand again. Rumors began to coalesce into theories, though no one dared publish them. It was said that the 13th child, the one who had chosen the others, who had smiled while dying, who was not born of woman but born of the place itself, had become something more. That he had never truly been buried, but had sunk into the land, merging with it, feeding off memory and melody alike. That his roots were not metaphoric, but literal, stretching beneath the town like veins through flesh, carrying whispers, dreams, songs that did not belong to the living. One traveler dared walk the grove under moonlight, humming the hymn softly to himself. He later said he felt a tug, not on his coat or hair or arms, but something deeper, like his thoughts were being drawn down into the soil, one at a time, until he no longer remembered why he was there. He said it felt like the ground was listening, that beneath the surface were not corpses but consciousnesses, aware, waiting, growing stronger with every note. He ran before dawn. He never slept again. Others were not so lucky. From 1705 to 1710, disappearances near Salem Hollow increased. Hikers, vagabonds, even soldiers assigned to patrol the backroads vanished without trace. The only clue ever left behind was the soil, disturbed in perfect circles, the size of children's footprints, sometimes with a single red leaf resting atop, even in spring. In time, the area was declared forbidden. Surveyors simply circled the region on maps with a wordless blot of ink. But still, some were drawn. The hymn, it seemed, never stopped spreading. It passed in lullabies, in the wind whistling through old churches, in cracked floorboards, in dreams where footsteps echoed just behind you. Musicians in distant towns began composing pieces they claimed to hear in sleep. Melodies identical to the 13th hymn, though they'd never visited Massachusetts. Children were born with crescent-shaped birthmarks, 13 in one town, 13 again 2 years later. A pattern began, a cycle, and those who saw it tried to hide it. But the ground beneath Salem Hollow remembered. The roots never forgot. In the final written testimony of a Jesuit archivist stationed in New Haven, he described visiting the area out of curiosity. He stayed only a single night. The next day, he wrote in his journal that he believed Salem Hollow was not a village that had gone mad or been cursed. It had been seeded long before settlers arrived, long before the fire, long before language. He wrote that the 13th child was not the beginning but the fruit of something ancient that required no altar, only memory. That to speak its hymn, to draw its symbol, to even remember the names of the 13, was to water it. He burned his journal. He hanged himself with his rosary. The wind, they say, still carries the hymn. If you walk the woods where Salem Hollow once lay and hum it, you might feel the tug. Not harsh, not violent, just enough to tilt your balance to make you lean forward as if listening. They say if you don't stop. If you reach the center before dawn, something will sing with you, from below, in perfect harmony. And when it does, it will remember your name forever. The trees will shift to face you. The soil will open just enough. And in the morning, there will be one more tree, one more May on the wind, and one less person in the world above. The roots remember blood, and now they want more than memory.